Welcome everyone to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Dean. This is my co-host Richie Merritt to my right. And we have a guest here, Pat Murphy, today. We are broadcasting on Manchester Television Channel 23 every Monday night, Thursday morning, and on weekends, Saturday and Sunday. We also have a YouTube channel called Inform New Hampshire and a Facebook page, also Inform New Hampshire. Feel free to stop by there and like us and subscribe if you will. We're going to talk a little bit about cultural Marxism today. And before we do jump in, I just want to make another opportunity to mention our political prisoner friend, Jerry DeLamus. Richie, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we've been asking people to contribute to Jerry's Legal Defense Fund. So we'd like to continue to do that because he's being railroaded. So if you'd like to contribute to Jerry DeLamus's fund, you can go to www.patriotjerry.com and donate whatever you can, $5 or $10. You know, financially times are tough, but if you can help out, I know that Jerry and Susan would appreciate it. Thank you.
We've had recent news that of the conditions that they're putting him in out there, and I guess it was one of the Bundys is in pretty poor condition. This is about 5-day-old news, I think, but they weren't treating him. They were leaving him. He was in a lot of pain, and you got to wonder who these guys are. They're not just holding people prisoners. They're trying to demoralize them and probably doing a good job of it. But Jerry's in good shape, so we hear, and God bless him, and our prayers are with him and his wife, Sue. Sue is a state representative here in New Hampshire. So there are a lot of good people on the side of Jerry. So we pray that he'll be released and freed and have his liberty restored to him soon. So let's go down this path of cultural Marxism and the attacks on our First Amendment here in the United States and the political correctness and all those things that the power structure is using to beat us down, to destroy our educational system and whatever else they're doing to take over this country, because that's what they're doing.
Let me say one thing before we start, and that is hopefully everybody's thoughts and prayers will go out to these policemen that have been injured or lost their lives in the line of duty recently. There's a lot of that, and it's almost a virtual war on policemen in this country. These are guys that are fathers, brothers, neighbors, friends, and they're great people. And when we don't have them, it's going to be a whole different universe. So this officer lost his life in Worcester. It's a particularly tragic thing. He's a great guy, and just keep him in your prayers, keep him in your mind, and that's all I have to say on that, I guess. Okay, right. So getting back to where we were last week, we talked a little bit about political correctness. I think we mentioned cultural Marxism. A lot of what we do right here is we look at history as something that's been cut off from the educational system, and is a reason we have so many other problems today. People seem to be totally detached from a knowledge of their own history, from American history, from European history, and from some of the major events of the past century, which still affect us right now. I've always felt, and a lot of people do feel, that the primary event of the 20th century against which everything is set is the Russian Revolution. And if you look at what's going on in your country today, you can see many of the things that happened in that time frame and that came out of that revolution are still with us today. Now, you probably have more socialist knowledge you've ever had in the history of the world. So with that, I think that I would say I'll give you just a real, inside of 10 minutes, a history of the Russian Revolution. I'll give you an idea of what that's about. And then take a look at this thing called cultural Marxism to see where it comes from, because it's an offshoot of an event at the end of the Russian Civil War, which was the attempted Soviet invasion of Poland in 1920. The Russian Revolution, if you look at the First World War, basically it's like you have a couple of clubs fighting each other. You have Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey pitted against Britain, France, Russia, and Italy. Russia will take tremendous losses in that war. They're very, very ill-prepared. If you look at their soldiers, there's almost nothing that was designed to really help them in their trench system. The Russian Officer Corps would look at their men, refer to them as pigs, dogs, scum. They were told that They shouldn't eat in any of the cafes. If they're on leave, even be on the sunny side of the street. The abuse was just phenomenal. And what you had was horrific suffering in that army in the First World War. A lack of ammunition, lack of weaponry, poor distribution system, not even pumps to pump out the trenches, and in fact a lack of boots. They had probably one factory in all of Russia that produced the tan and produced leather so that they could be equipped. So you had a problem right from the get-go. Into the war, Russia will experience tremendous losses. Come to the point where the Tsar will be asked to step down. As an act of patriotism, he'll step down. Tsar Nicholas II is a person that was never fitted, ideally, for that position, never wanted to be the Tsar. And by March 1917, a combination of officer corps and political elites will ask him to step down, and he will step down. And what you'll have is you'll have a moderate socialist government come into play under the leadership of a fellow named Alexander Kerensky. And Kerensky will have one foot inside the Representative Assembly, the Duma, and the other will be inside of this thing called the Petrograd Soviet. So he's straddling the two. And he'll make the mistake of issuing a general amnesty and allowing communists to come back into the country, because Lenin and the leaders of this, Trotsky, are not even in Russia when that revolution begins. So it's never a popular revolution in the sense that these guys started it. The Tsar did step down as an act of patriotism, and the Russians, they generally want to pursue the First World War. They want to beat Germany. So once Lenin comes back in, you'll find multiple attempts at coups, starting street riots, in April, in June, in July, and then finally by October, they will have succeeded in totally subverting the Russian military and getting a largely peasant army to start to vacate the trenches, head back into the major cities, and your Russian Revolution will take place. Most people won't even know that it's going on. It's largely bloodless. You'll have people in cafes, people in restaurants, while all this activity is going on, and all of the key communications will be taken, and Lenin will begin to build his Soviet empire. One of the first things that they do is they'll start a police organization. Now, the Tsar had the largest secret police force in the world, called the Okhrana, prior to 1917. That's 14,000 people, which is huge, which is big. Within 3 years, the Cheka, it's mentioned about 3 lines inside of one of the local papers, Iskra, I think. Within 3 years, that will be 250,000 men. It's 250,000 with associates. And what you'll have is, right from the get-go, you'll have people disappear, you'll have some terrible things happen, and so they begin to become grossly unpopular. And so people that are pro-monarchist, pro-government, pro-traditional military will move off into the south of Russia, around the Kuban, and they'll begin to build an army. They're called the White Armies. And they'll be spread all over Russia. They'll be in Siberia, they'll be in the south, they'll be in the north, in the Baltic regions. And you will have the Russian Civil War will have begun. That will go on for a number of years. And one of the leaders of that will be this hero of the neocons, Leon Trotsky. Now, the first thing he has to do is he has to build a Russian military, because the Bolsheviks have totally subverted the Russian military through a thing they called Order Number 1, which was to destroy the authority of the officer corps within the Russian army, demoralize them. So he's going to build an army of 5 million people. And what he did was, and you think about this, you get a lot of pro-Trotskyites that claim that he did a great job and he built this enormous army and defended Russia. It was very simple. They'd go into a town and knock on a door, and if you had anybody in there of any age at all, they're inducted into that military. If they were not there, that family would be put onto a list and held hostage. So you had an army of 5 million built within a couple of years, most of them not really fit for combat, but you also had 5 million desertions in that same time period, not all at once. You guys remember the movie by Boris Pasternak? The book is Dr. Zhivago. The movie is Dr. Zhivago. Yeah. You can see a scene where you see the Russian army. It's been Bolshevized now. They're ragtag. Some of them have the red armband on. You see the train coming, right? You don't see any of them smiling, do you? None of them are smiling at all. And you see on the train, that's Strelnikov from the movie with the scar on his face, is supposedly Leon Trotsky. He's not a popular guy with them. All right, it speeds on through, and then later the train is stopped, and you see Yuri is apprehended, and he gets onto the train, and Strelnikov says to him, the private life, it's over, okay? These guys are fanatics. Leon Trotsky, when that train was referred to as the Black Train of Death, and what he would have on that train was you'd have horse cavalry in there, because most of that Civil War it's a multitude of smaller skirmishes. There's just a handful of big battles. But what you have is you have horse cavalry on there, and you have the thing bristling with armor, naval guns, armor plate, machine guns. He had a brass band on there. He had 2 Packard touring cars that he'd get off into. But as soon as he got off on any battlefront, the first thing he would do is line up people, the political commissar and that general, that colonel, whoever, for anybody that failed, be an object lesson execution. He was a mass murderer on a monumental scale. So you start to wonder, how can we have people like these so-called neocons take a person like that and hold him up as an example for anybody to follow?
You mean today, right?
Today.
And
Trotsky would get off that train. He had his own bodyguard. They're all dressed in red leather, red boots, red pantaloons, long red jackets. They had the Kiev Rus hat, which comes up to a point with a star, all decked out in red, and proceed from one battlefront to the next. And that would be a war that is absolutely atrocious. You wouldn't talk about the things that went on in it. It's that bad. But to give an example of what Trotsky is like, in 1919 you have a communist revolution in Hungary. You have a guy named Bela Kun conducting that revolution. And in that, they communize Hungary for about 6 months, and the Hungarians will become livid when they attempt to sexualize children down to 5 years of age. And finally, that's the last straw, and they're thrown out. And Bela Kun goes back into Russia, to the Crimea. He's a homicidal maniac, and he links up with Rosa Zalkind, whom they call the Zemliachka. Highly educated, degree from the Sorbonne, not a very good-looking person. You should make a freight train take a dirt road, actually. Yeah, all dressed in leather. And they'll capture, as the White armies disintegrate, they'll capture 50,000 former Tsarist officers. And so, by teletype, they'll contact Trotsky and say, what do we do with them? Exterminate all 50,000 of them. That's just one example of what that individual is. But even Hollywood now, they'll make a movie called The Trotsky. It's like a joke, where how can you even joke about something like that? So now, anyway, this is trying to get a lot of Russian history in just a couple of minutes here. But
that's by design, though, to soften us up.
Oh, absolutely. You're not looking at the reality of what these people are like.
Right.
So now the White armies will start to disintegrate, and you can get into a whole show for hours on the nature of that conflict. But eventually, what will happen is it's decided by Lenin, and because it was always their aim was to use Russia as a stepping ground, because they despise Russia. As Lenin said, I spit on Russia. And what they wanted was a general invasion of Europe, and they were looking for worldwide communist revolution. So they decided that they were going to go into Germany. Germany had a very large socialist labor force, almost 250,000 in Berlin alone. So they're going to go into Germany. They were hoping England was going to become communist, and in their mind, as soon as they started this, they'd receive assistance from the working class throughout the world. Meaning, after all, they were claiming this was going to be for them. Mm-hmm. And so you had hundreds of thousands of Russians begin to mass on the Polish border. The Poles could see this coming. Poland was a country that had disappeared from the map of history in the 1700s through a series of partitions, and now was reconstituted at the end of the First World War, so they're scurrying to protect themselves. And they attempted with the Ukraine to build an organization to protect themselves. And then finally the Poles, as they watch this Russian army build, will attack. And they push the Russians all the way back into Kiev. And a short time later, there's a huge counteroffensive. And it looks like Poland is going to collapse. And you've got the massive Russian armies coming into Warsaw. They're just outside of Warsaw. And these titanic battles will go on. you have a number of Americans that fight in that, former pilots with the Lafayette Escadrille, who will strafe the Russian troops, and later Poland will put up a statue to these guys. It'll be knocked down by the Soviets after 1939, then resurrected. It's still there today, right outside of Warsaw. And at the last second, you'll have a Catholic priest lead part of that counteroffensive right out in front. He's killed. And Poland will rout the Russians and split the Russian forces, and the Russian forces will go back into Russia. So now you have a huge problem. Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Yegorov, they're stunned that they haven't had the support that they thought that they were going to get worldwide. And so they decide to have a meeting on what the strategy will be. So what they did was they had a thing called the Comintern, which is in Moscow, which is an organization for worldwide revolution. So if you went to this building, large building in Menage Square, as you walk down the corridors, each room is dedicated to a different country. Here's America, here's Canada, here's Mexico, here's Brazil, here's Norway. And within that, you have all of these head communists lecturing all the time, then bringing people in from those countries in an effort to build a fifth column and to exploit every weakness in that country. So they're going to list every newspaper editor, every magazine publisher, every high school, every college, what people they can get onto their side, and they're literally looking to get into the different nations and into the thought developing mechanisms and the public opinion making mechanisms. And so they have an enormous meeting in there. And they decide who are we going to speak to develop our new tactic, and who can tell us what's really happened. So from Hungary, where that communist revolution has already collapsed, and like say Bela Kun has already gone back to the Crimea to commit mass murder, they have the prominent Marxist intellectual. He's the greatest Marxist intellectual since Karl Marx, and that's Georgy Lukács. And so Lukács is asked, he's sitting in here with Lenin and the entire Politburo to try to hash out what happened, why they weren't successful. And Lukács is going to point out that nationalism, to take the national patriotic spirit head on, is going to be a very, very difficult thing, and they really can't do it that way. What they have to do is start a long march through the institutions. They have to get into the newspapers. They have to get into publishing. They have to get into laborers' organizations, manufacturing, or the universities, the colleges. But he will say that first and foremost, the reason that they feel beyond anything is that they were stopped by Christian churches, particularly the Catholic Church. They said that will be the number one organization. You need to change a moral conscience, because you will never be successful until you destroy that mindset that's established by the Christian churches. And so from there, what you'll see is they'll put together a number of individuals. There's about 1,200 of them that will go into specifically the Catholic Church between 1920 and 1930 into the seminaries. Now, we know that's true because years later, in New York City, there'll be a woman who came from Italy by the name of Bella Dodd, and she'll be instrumental in doing that. And she's a member of the New York City Teachers Union. She's a head communist official, connects with the Comintern, with agents, and she's very, very familiar with it. And she'll do that for years. And as the Second World War approaches, she'll contact Moscow, because everything in that party went through Moscow. We know from Venona that everything came out of Moscow. And as the Second World War approaches, she's afraid of being cut off on information. And so, and according to her testimony, she asked her handlers who she would contact and what she would do if a war emerges and she can't get through her normal chain of command. And I said, that'll be easy. All you have to do, I think it was go to the Waldorf Astoria. You'll see probably 2 or 3 of the wealthiest men in the world. You'll know exactly what to do. So you can see the connection between enormous wealth and Soviet Union becoming what it was. If you pull up, for instance, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton, you can see that whole chain of events. So now Bella Dodd stays with this all through the 40s, and then has a change of heart and wants to get out. And when she tries to get out, you can see the vituperation and the hatred. She's called a racist. She's called a woman hater. She's called a fascist. She's called everything. She's threatened with being killed. But she goes into Fordham College and lectures on this, on what she's seen.
Isn't that typical, too, when they try to discredit you?
Oh, beyond anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The KGB, in everything that it did, its paramount power, its paramount expertise was in the destruction of somebody's reputation and the elimination of people politically. They were very, very skillful in that.
Surgically, yeah.
They could frame people. They were very skillful in framing people. The last time that we talked about this cultural Marxism and political correctness, you mentioned global warming. And people don't understand that right now, you look at the stuff going on in Canada, all the transgender issues and the use of language, and now the law that's being laid out where if you offend somebody on this or you refuse to use the proper terminology, that's going to be considered a crime, and you can go to prison. Well, you can go back to the 1920s, and you look at this whole thing coming out of this revolution, and there's a famous agronomist, and his name is Nikolai Vavilov. He's a college professor, good-looking guy. He's a world's authority on agriculture and plants and seeds, and Lenin will support him, and he'll go worldwide and collect plants and seeds, and he'll build this huge laboratory with 250,000 different seed types from everywhere on the earth. He's like an Indiana Jones, like a world traveler, right? And there's a book on him. It's called The Murder of Vavilov, which this is a true story. It's like Dr. Zhivago, but it's a true story. You can pull that up, and you can pick up a hardcover book for like $6, and it's a great read. But he's a geneticist, so he believes in Mendelian genetics. So you're studying genes and chromosomes. Well, he's supported by Lenin. Lenin will die in 1924, and Stalin comes in. And then just accidentally, in Pravda, which is one of their newspapers, which means truth. You had Pravda and you had Izvestia, which meant the news. And as the Russians used to say, there's no truth in the news and there's no news in the truth, right? But there's a journalist, and he's like a lot of the journalists we have here, just not that good, right? And he runs into this guy named Trofim Lysenko, who was kind of a whack job, and Lysenko was saying, "Yeah, I can cure all the starvation needs in Russia." This is in the 30s now. Of course, Stalin is using starvation in Ukraine to break their spirit. It's killing people by the millions. So Trofim Lysenko will speak with this young guy and say, all they have to do is do what I call vernalization. You take seed and you soak it in water and you freeze it and you make it more hardy, and you can force the plant to become something very, very quickly. And of course, a lot of the stuff that he's talking about is sheer nonsense. So he's on the lunatic fringe. He's like this guy, the science guy. What's his name with the bow tie? He probably hangs around with Glenn Beck. Nye, is it Nye? Nye, the science guy.
Bill Nye.
I'm going to come around to that in a second, but. This guy made no sense at all. But Stalin looked at him, and he reads this article, and this guy is saying exactly what Stalin wants applied to the human being. We can change human nature. We can alter the environment, and we can produce the type of human being that we want. So this guy right here is going to become the man, all right? Because what he's doing is he's taking bad science, and he's merging that with a political agenda that a dictator wants, and thus you have the same as global warming. So Vavilov will wind up in a gulag and he starves to death. He dies within 3 years. Anybody else that supported him had a choice. You either write a position paper to support his position on what we're going to do with this, or it's curtains for you. And that's what you find is find the same type of thing. Except for here, it's largely economic survival where there might be grant money to take that position to go along with this. With them, it's a question of life or death. But that's a great book on Vavilov, the murder of Vavilov.
We're running a little low on time here, so I want to ask you a question. You mentioned that the Hungarian Communist Revolution fell apart after 6 months because of the outrage that the people had.
Right.
Why don't we have that here? Because they're doing the same thing here. They've sexualized our children. They're
breaking down morals.
They've broken down the
They've
morals.
done it over a long period of time. They've done
editing our speech. They're coming after our First Amendment. They're stopping people from. They literally are censoring, Facebook and YouTube, and so what's the difference?
There isn't any difference, but the reason you don't have a reaction here is you've been brought along piecemeal for a long time, for decades, from the 1960s. I can remember when there were no TVs. There was no. You never heard any swearing. You never saw any vulgarity. Now you take a look at what you have right now, and it's just a total world of difference. But it happened over a period of time. But that does go back to the Russian Revolution. When you look at what went on early in that revolution, you have a woman named Alexandra Kollontai, and she actually survived Stalin and everybody. She's one of the few in the original entourage that survived. But she set up an organization called the Gendotel. And what that was designed to do was they were going to take, she called it the glass of water theory. You would make sex so common that you wouldn't even think twice about it. And what they were doing was they were weakening the bond between husband and wife within the family so that there's less commitment, there's less loyalty, there's less trust. They did everything they could to destroy the family. They would initially attack conservative males with a mother and children, and then within about 10 years, once the children are trained, they would ferret out both parents. That's how that system worked. And we talked a little bit about the Pokrovsky School, where they destroyed Russian history and through the use of sexual innuendo, and they took out anything traditional in the classroom, respect for the teacher, lesson plans, homework, any of that. And so you had a chaotic situation. By 1934, that changed. They took a military man by the name of Bubnov. He came walking in. It's all the same text. It's all the common level of knowledge, Common Core. It's all uniforms. It's all regimentation. And there's very little knowledge of the outside world except what they want.
Well, they're succeeding. We've got a serious problem here in this country. So,
well, it's up to the fathers have to stand up. I mean, if you look at Common Core, it's an intellectual, it's an emotional, it's an ethical and spiritual assault on your child. I don't know why these men aren't standing up. I mean, the mothers do. I've seen some teachers stand right up and refuse to do it, which is just absolutely tremendous. But we need more people.
How can you possibly let your daughter, 5-year-old, go into a bathroom, men's bathroom, knowing that some pedophile is going to walk in there? How can you possibly sit back and say, oh, it's okay?
Well, Target's losing a lot of sales right now, which is great, voting with their dollars. So we're going to have to wrap it up. I just want to mention that Richie and I are state coordinators for National Liberty Alliance, and we do believe that National Liberty Alliance has a solution to some of these problems, which is to restore the common law grand jury, which gives we the people the authority to meet together in secret and root out corruption in our government. So anything else, Richie?
I just want to thank Pat Murphy for coming. I sit here quietly and I learn a lot. Yep. So I appreciate him coming here.
I only say this about the law. If you look at Russia, if you look at their history, they produce some scholars on Russian law, just a handful. There's one called Evgeny Pashukanis, and he was asked what the nature of law was in Russia. And he said in Russia, law was replaced with the plan. That's exactly what he said. There is no law. It's arbitrary. It's what they want. System.
Well, that's happened here.
It's coming.
That's what that is right there.
Well, thank you for watching. Hope you tune in next week. Have a great day. Appreciate it.